Christian parenting.
You know, the longing doesn't stop, very true, when you're holding that baby in your arms. The longing doesn't stop when you get that decree signed by a judge. So, to your point at the very beginning of this conversation, longing creates more longing. Hey, welcome back, sweet families, to the Call to Love podcast, where, as you know, each week we dive into the practical, the clinical, but always most importantly, the biblical aspects of the foster care and adoption callings. Hey, as we get started today, I want to encourage you with this truth. Wherever you are in your journey in life, your career, your relationships, or even your foster and adoption journey, you're not too late. Isn't that good news today? That is what we are going to dive into. And my special guest is my dear friend, author, and podcast host, Rebecca George. She has just written a wonderful book with that title, You're Not Too Late, Trusting God's Timing in a Hurry Up World. Don't we feel like we live in a hurry up world and we want to see God do great things, but his timing is always good and best. That's what we're going to talk about today. Rebecca, my friend, I am so grateful you're here. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, Summer, I love being with you. This is one of my very favorite parts about launching a book. I feel like I get to just catch up with all my friends. So this is awesome.
I agree. I love this. And friends, I got to share with you, just as we're starting out our conversation, this is a super special conversation for me. First of all, yes, I get to catch up with a friend, which is amazing. But second of all, Rebecca and I, like our communication of choice right now, because we live in different states, we Marco Polo back and forth all the
Yes.
time, right?
Yes.
And so I remember when we were Marcoing back and forth and you were dreaming with
Yeah.
the Lord about this very book. And so it is so special now to hold it in my hands, to have been sitting down and reading it, and the words that you were sharing with me as you were dreaming about it. And you share so much of your own story here. And I want our listeners just to get a chance to know you. I love you and adore you, and I think you're the best ever. So, but let's begin by having you just share a little bit about you, and then we're going to dive into this message today.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Well, I live here in East Tennessee. If people can't hear that in my accent, you probably will pretty quickly. But I am a pastor's wife. My husband, Dustin, is the lead pastor of our local church here in East Tennessee, right outside of the Smokies. So that's a huge part of my life, is just being entrenched in our local church family and our life there. And as you said, I'm an author, a speaker, a podcaster. I host the show Radical Radiance, which just has a heart to equip women with conversations that point us back to what it looks like to radiate the heart of Jesus in all that we do, our life, our work, our relationships. And so I kind of see that as a little bit of the umbrella that a lot of the work that I do falls underneath. So that's kind of where this next book came from, is exploring, in and out of different seasons of our lives, what it looks like to trust in God's timing, which is really, really challenging, whether it be in a relational sense, like an adoption journey, as you mentioned a moment ago, or we're wanting to reconcile a relationship, or we're growing in our career, whatever it is, we all experience longing. And yeah, I love having that conversation of what it looks like to be faithful in the meanwhile.
Yeah, I love that. And that is a really challenging aspect of our growth walk with the Lord, as
Yeah.
whatever it is that we're walking through. And so, specifically, I mean, you're not a mom yet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but you have walked with me through all of our kind of adoption ups and downs, and heard some of the
Totally.
stories, and have such a heart. And I love that this message speaks to every aspect of life. And so, as I was sharing with you, friends, I want to remind us today that even though this is a podcast about adoption and foster care, that your identity is not found in that calling, right?
Yeah.
You are not who you are because you are a foster parent or because you are an adoptive parent. It is part of how God is guiding you through this journey of making you who you are, of sanctifying you, and calling you closer to himself and a relationship with him, but it is not who you are. And so I think that's important as we talk about you're not too late, because sometimes we hurry up because we're trying to either prove to ourselves or proving to others in our lives that we got to get there in order to be this, do this, or to even proclaim that the Lord did it. So let's
Mm.
dive into just a little bit of your heart for this book in terms of, what really inspired you to communicate this message at this time.
Yeah, yeah. I can remember initially when I started dreaming about this. At first, I thought it might be a book on singleness,
Mm,
because you've heard these stories, Summer. I was a bridesmaid 12 times before I married Dustin. I had just gone through a really prolonged season in my 20s of marrying off all of my people, planning their baby showers, their bachelorette parties, all of those things. So I just felt like I had a lot to say to single women in their 20s and 30s who were navigating that and feeling like, are there any men out there who love the Lord, and just navigating that longing that is God given, right?
Yeah.
And so as I reflected on that though, and talked to other women in my life and just asked them to pray about whatever this next book would become, I realized that longing for me didn't end when I married Dustin, right?
Yeah.
It actually just now looks different
Yeah.
than it did when I was single. And so there's this line in the book that I come back to of longing leads to more longing. So
Yeah.
whether, and you kind of touched on this a minute ago, whether it is, you have children, but then you felt this call to adopt, and so now there's this new thing stirring in your heart that you don't know what to do with. Or maybe you're a mama of multiple children and you are growing in this area of your career, and there's this tension that exists there. It can look a million different ways, but I began to discover that it was bigger than just singleness. It truly was this thing of longing. And I mean, I've dealt with it my whole life. And I think in a broken world, until we meet Jesus, we are going to experience and have to navigate trusting in God for something for the rest of our days. And so many times, those are kind of those imperfect glimpses at what our heart ultimately longs for, which is the perfection of all things. And we'll get to experience that one day, praise God. But my heart really is, what do we do with that until then? You know?
Right. Absolutely. And I love that you share that. I think it's a great point to say longing leads to longing, because we in our minds, we convince ourselves, well, once I achieve this, or once I receive this, or once I get to this point, then that longing is going to cease. But you're right. There is always something on the other side of that. What is the heart behind that? Why do we do that, Rebecca?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think if we zoom out at a bigger picture of what God is doing, and I shared kind of the end of the story a moment ago, but if we zoom out to share kind of the beginning of it, we are not living in a world as it once was in the garden, as God
Right.
created it, in
Yeah.
perfect fellowship and communion with Him, that was severed because of sin. Right. So now, on the other side of Jesus's life and ministry, He came to make a way to restore our relationship with God. And so, because of salvation, we live in that reality of kind of a now and not yet. I call it living between two Edens in the book. And so, that's where we are today, awaiting that future restoration and redemption of all things. And so, I think number one, that's the spiritual reality that exists. And then culturally, we are moving at a faster pace than we ever have before. I think about even the temptations that our generation has versus, let's say, my mom or my grandmother. They don't, neither of them have social media. Neither of them, are plagued by scrolling on their phones and seeing how many children this friend from high school has, or
Right.
where so and so friend from 20 years ago went on vacation when maybe they don't have the budget to this year.
Right.
Those types of things that we're just surrounded by
Yeah.
choice, by the way,
Yes.
all day, all day long, every day. And so I think that exists. And accompanying that, our lives have more ease and a quicker pace than they ever have before. So, a couple examples, let's say we have an early flight in the morning and we don't want to inconvenience our husband or friend. We just call an Uber and they're at our house in 15 minutes. If we're sick and we want, chicken noodle soup, a friend doesn't bring it to us, we DoorDash it from Panera and it's at our house in half an hour. And so, what I believe that's done is it's trained our hearts, even in the insignificant things of life, to expect them quickly, and really not to have a whole lot of resilience to wait. So then again, if I zoom out, it should be no surprise to us that it is harder and harder for us to do it in the more significant, more vulnerable, more challenging seasons of life and growth, spiritually speaking,
Yeah.
because we don't even do it when we're hungry, right?
Yeah.
So I think all of that has led us to this place of it being really challenging to trust in God's timing.
Yeah, that is such a great point. I love that. And it begs the question, and I think maybe because I'm a bit of a pleaser, especially when I think about the Lord, like, is it displeasing to the Lord to be
Mm,
in a place of constant longing?
yeah. Whew.
I
I feel
went
like I
there.
just need to like sit there.
I know, right?
Yeah. I mean, I I think where my mind immediately goes with that is when things become an idol. And that's
Yeah.
not a word we love to use in our culture.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
not, worshiping golden calves any longer. It's much more insidious than that in
Yes.
the year of our Lord 2025 as
Yeah.
we are longing for things. I think when we elevate a good desire, and that's an important piece of it, the desire to be
Yes.
married, the desire to have kids, the desire to adopt, to grow in your career, all those things are awesome and good.
Yeah.
And we should want those things if you want them. However, this is how I define it in the book. When we elevate that thing to a place of prominence meant for God alone,
Yeah.
and your heart, our hearts know when we've done that, it has become an idol. And when something becomes an idol, we kind of walk through this cycle that I mentioned too in the message where we look, which is not sin, right? To notice, hey, I have a desire to adopt, and my best friend over here just got to walk through that journey. And I
Yeah.
notice that. That's
Yeah.
not sin.
Right.
Then we experience longing. So there's looking, longing. Longing isn't sin. For our hearts to desire something. Where we get in trouble is when we linger. The third
Yeah.
piece of that cycle, where our hearts kind of ruminate on that thing that we want, it becomes our greatest heart's desire. That's where I think it becomes displeasing to the Lord. And our hearts know when we've reached that place, and there's some things I think we can do to turn from that, to trust in him, and we'll talk about that more, I know. But I don't know. I'd be curious, like, throwing the question back to you.
Yeah.
When do you feel like maybe that's become displeasing to him?
Marriage is the foundation of our families. When our marriage is strong, our families are strong. When our marriage is struggling, our families struggle too. We all know we should prioritize our marriages. However, in the busyness of life, it is easy to push our marriages to the side and say, we'll focus on that later. If you are feeling the nudge to invest in your marriage, Christian Parenting's newest digital guide, Marriage Simplified, is the resource for you. Additionally, if you are struggling with the difficult conversations that surround divorce, blended families, in laws, or even single parenting, we cover these topics head on too. Inside this guide, you will find our best and favorite podcasts, videos, and articles on all things marriage. You will also find conversation guides and discussion questions for your spouse and your kids. The best part is, since this guide is digital, you can download it straight to your phone or computer and search through the resources whenever you need them. Marriage is far from simple, and no guide can truly simplify it. But we are so glad that you are taking the time to pore over these resources and strengthen the relationship and family that God has blessed you with. You can go to cpgive.org to download your copy for just $5. That's the best of the best resources from top Christian parenting contributors for just $5. Again, get your copy now at cpgive.org. Yeah. Oh, I would agree with that fully. Yeah. Anything that takes the glory from him, anything that distracts
Mm,
us from focusing on giving him glory, which that could be an adoption process. Listen, for our families out here that are working through this calling and this process, you have to be tenacious,
yeah.
to
Yeah.
go through these process. It is pursuing a moving target at all times. I mean, the
Yeah.
paperwork changes, it keeps adding up, the deadlines change. Oh, you just had this done, but because it's been 6 months, guess what? You got to do it again. And you're on this constant cycle of trying to meet the demands to fulfill the longing of your heart of a good thing. But when you get caught up in that relentless pursuit of the process to achieve a result, and we overlook a relationship, the most important relationship, one being with God above all, and then secondly, the people around us. And the reason why I say that is because I'm like waving my hand really big right now. If you're not watching us on YouTube, like that was me. There was a really extensive season where all I could do, I had tunnel vision and I thought I
Of
was doing the
course.
best and right thing, but the
Yeah.
people right around me didn't have me because I was
Mm,
so focused on the result rather than relationship. And that was true of my relationship with the Lord as well. It was like, Lord, you've called me to do this. And rather than walking with him through it, I was
yeah.
frustrated because he wasn't doing it in my time frame. I mean, let's just be
Yeah.
real. Our
Yeah.
listeners know, like I tell on myself all the time. So much of what I've learned
Sure.
through all of this is because I've done it wrong and the Lord's had to come back and lovingly correct me and give me insight as to sweet daughter, this this is not the way. You have exhausted yourself because this is not the way. This is the way. And so that's why I think it's an important topic for us to be talking about today. Again, related to anything in life that we're longing for, but specifically for our audience, like there are so many of our listeners, they are longing to be parents. They are longing to be called mom. They are longing for a child that is on the other side of the world that they've already given their heart to, that they have never been in the same room with. And all of that longing is so, so good. But we have to keep our focus on He who is perfect, He who is orchestrating every detail, and He who's perfect or whose timing is perfect. And so, yeah, I love that. I think that's so, so helpful. And I mean, let's go back into, you talked about how we can do that. I think that's a great next
Yeah.
step in our conversation of, okay, we're capturing the heart. We may have stepped on some toes a little bit spiritually, like step on my own
Yeah.
toes right now, and that's okay. I really think in order to get to where we need to be spiritually, sometimes we need those little moments of stepping on toes and going, oh, okay, wait a minute, I need to reorient my thinking or really examine my heart and my goals, because we wander. There
Yeah.
is so much pulling at us. There's so much distracting us. There's so many shiny things, and those airport arrival moments with balloons and signs and the whole family's there celebrating. Like we want that, we long
Yeah.
for that as foster and adoptive parents. um, but the not yet, I love you
Mhm.
talking about that. So how do we walk well with the Lord in the not yet?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give us a few things. The first thing I'll say, you know, that just came as you were unpacking that a moment ago is like, we can only control our side of the street
That's right.
of this. There's so much, whether it's an adoption journey, meeting the guy of your dreams, whatever it is, like there's only so much that we can control
That's right.
in terms of being faithful in the meanwhile. And a good part of that, I believe, Summer, is just not missing out on your life today,
Yeah.
right?
So good.
Like, be about your life.
Yeah.
Whatever God is doing in your family's life, in your life today, be about it, be faithful in it. And He is so in control and faithful to provide the next step.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what I would go back and tell myself, in those single years, just to run with that example, is just
Yeah.
don't miss what God is doing here and now today. And just practically, if you're thinking like, okay, yeah, that's great, I don't want to miss my life, but I'm really struggling, a couple of things that have been really helpful to me. The first, I think, is so foundational to this conversation, and that is a willingness to take your desire and your longing to the Lord.
That's right.
We both grew up in sweet Southern culture, which I love.
Yes.
However, um, so many times when we're navigating conflict or whatever, we kind of have that like, oh, I'm good, I'm busy, but I'm good perspective,
Yeah.
where we kind of are unwilling to confront the harder things of life. And I think the challenging part of that for me is I started doing that at a young age with my relationship with God,
Mm.
right? I was unwilling to maybe take him, the harder pieces of what I was walking through, or
Yeah.
really trust him with that, or maybe I trusted him, but I didn't feel like I could just be raw and honest before the Lord about
Yeah.
my longings. And I was so challenged as I just read through scripture as I was writing this message. I read through the Psalms, and talk about a great place to go if you
Yes.
are battling with longing, and just read how the psalmist, how David just cried out to the Lord in the midst of their longing. And that was such an encouragement to me to read through so many of those. And there was a passage that kept coming up for me as I was reading the Psalms. It's in Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. If you've been in your Bible a while, it'll probably be a familiar passage to you. But the psalmist says, "Search my heart, O God. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. If there be a grievous way in me, lead me in the way everlasting."
Yeah.
And I remember writing that on a sticky note as I was writing this book. And I just kept coming back to it in my own story of longing, and almost using it as a prayer prompt guide of sorts, of
Yeah.
just going to God and saying, "God, search my heart. Would you reveal to me the areas where I have anxiety about this, where I'm not trusting you,
Yeah.
where how I would have written the story looks different than how you wrote the story.
Yes.
And while I may not fully understand that this side of heaven, would you grant me your wisdom? Would you give me your perspective and point me back to truth in these areas where I'm really
Yeah.
struggling?" And so I call that the search me God prayer in the book. We come back to it at the end of every chapter. But I think, number one, you don't have to have the book to do that in the middle of your own story today as you're listening. But that's the first place I would send you, is just being really honest before the Lord.
Yeah.
The second practical piece of advice I'll give is, there are so many moments along the way where we unexpectedly get caught off guard about our longing.
Yeah.
So I'll give the example of baby showers. Okay. I'm going to a lot of baby showers right now. I'm in my 30s and all my friends are having babies, and had a baby shower last weekend. And that is one of those opportunities where I kind of have to pre-decide, like, God's blessing in my friend's life is not to the exclusion of how he's at work in my life,
That's so good.
right? Her
Yeah.
win, her blessing is not my loss,
Yeah.
right? And sort of, one, having like the big sister encouragement to myself about that, but then also going to the Lord and being honest. Like,
Yeah.
I sometimes I don't even really want to go to the baby shower,
Yeah.
right? I don't I want to celebrate my friend, but God, would you grant me the joy that doesn't feel like it exists in my heart today? Like,
Yeah.
it will only be by your strength that I'm able to show up and celebrate this blessing in my friend's life. And I genuinely want to do that. So Lord,
Yeah.
would you just give me what I need to be able to show up well?
Yeah.
And so that's a huge piece. And pre-deciding how we'll answer questions about our longing is massive too. And
Mm.
I'm willing to bet that with our audience of who we're talking to right now, this is a huge piece of it, because it's likely that people in your life know, if you've been open about it, that you're walking down this journey of,
Yeah.
becoming a foster or adoptive parent. And so you walk in a baby shower, you walk in and see some friends you haven't seen in a while, it's likely that they're going to ask you about it. And
That's
it's
right.
likely that if you don't spend some time deciding how you'll answer that question, your heart's going to feel caught off guard. You're going
Yeah.
to be offended the rest of the day
Yes.
unnecessarily, right?
Yeah.
It's probably someone who just genuinely wants to know about your life,
That's right.
but it's worth spending a few minutes going, okay, thank you so much for asking. Here's what God's doing. And also, like, here's how I see God at work today in our family's life. Like, let me tell
Yeah.
you about that. A simple redirect can be one of the best ways to keep the conversation going
So good.
without getting offended. So I
Yeah,
think that's a massive part of this conversation too, is
for
just,
sure.
how do we handle personal questions?
Yeah, I love that. That is such wisdom. Yeah, because we can be tempted to go one or two ways. We can shut down, or we can absolutely verbal vomit and all of the big
Yes.
feels. And, then it comes across as a gripe session, or it comes across as ungrateful. I mean, I remember being in that space because, the longing doesn't stop. Very true. When you're holding that baby in your arms, the longing doesn't stop when you get that decree signed by a judge. Then it becomes longing to connect well. But if we have a lot of issues related to adoption and trauma with our kids who have come to us that have been in previous situations where they may not be attaching well, or their behaviors may be completely opposite of what we expected, what we imagined in this fulfillment of our adoption or our foster journey, it becomes really hard and really messy. So then the longing shifts to, can we just have peace back in our home again, Lord? Or can you help me connect with and attach to my child, or help my child attach to me? So to your point at the very beginning of this conversation, longing creates more longing. And so then in those conversations, it's like, okay, I mean, I remember early on in our journey when our daughter was crying day and night, and there was nothing I could do to calm her, please her, settle her, and people would ask those very genuine questions of just, oh, how are you doing, and is this not the most wonderful blessing of your life? And I got to the point where I was like, which answer would you like to hear? Would because there was a side of me that was breaking, and then there was the other side of me that was like, I know I should be grateful for all of this because I have received what I had been longing for. I have received the fulfillment of what God placed in my heart. But now on the other side of this was not what I expected. And it doesn't even feel like a reward or blessing in the hard. And so that can be true as well, as we're talking about longing and how God chooses and has planned all along to fulfill that longing or not fulfill it. How can we respond well, in a way that honors the Lord, in a way that doesn't compromise our witness and our relationship with Him, as people are curious about our lives, as we're walking through this wrestling match of, not hurrying up or rushing through the result that we're seeking? How do we reconcile when the fulfillment looks different than what we've been longing for?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think there's the wrestling with that in our hearts, and then there's the how do we publicly talk about it,
Yeah.
right? So, I'm a firm believer that you need someone, you need a handful of people in your life that you can be really raw
Yeah.
about, that know the full version of the
That's right.
story,
Yeah.
right? And are the person that you call when you're like, "Hey, my kid was up all night. I literally just need to shower and I need some caffeine." Like
Right.
you need those kind of people. And
You
so
do.
figure out who they are in your life and find them. If when I say that, that is not a knee jerk response of you knowing who that is in your life.
Yeah,
I also think we can be that for other people.
for sure.
So on the giving and receiving end, we can be, I think, more intentional than our culture would, than we would often see in our culture right now.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, that is just so glorifying and honoring to the Lord when we do that in friendship. So
Yeah.
that is one thing. Um, you need a support system. And I think those types of friends, those types of moments in our longing help us sort through some of that in
Yeah.
our hearts. We need to go to the Lord about it. We need to go have safe places where we can go to others about it.
Yeah.
And I think that better enables us to show up publicly and talk about it,
Mhm.
at the pace and at the depth that feels honoring to the Lord and honoring to your story.
Yeah.
My mom's friend who I haven't seen in 20 years, like, she doesn't need to know the whole story,
Right.
right? That actually is not necessary for me to over explain, over justify my season of life.
Yeah.
It's just not necessary. And so I think that's where I would ask the question, like, what is the truest, most necessary story that person needs to know
Mm.
in line at the baby shower to sign the little guest book, right? Like,
Yeah.
asking ourselves those questions can be helpful. And also, I think it's a muscle that we build in our longing to be able to learn how to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
The first time you talk about your adoption journey and the frustrations and the challenges and the setbacks and the delays, it will probably feel crushing. The more you talk about it, the more
Yeah.
you flex that muscle,
Yeah.
um, the easier it'll become. It's like anything, right? And so, yeah, I think those are a few things that have helped me
Yeah.
in different seasons of longing.
I love that. I think that is so practical and it's so encouraging. And it all comes back to self-discipline. It comes back to this posture of our hearts where we are choosing surrender repeatedly. It's not a one-time choice. It is an ongoing surrender of the big feelings that come out of all of this, the frustrations, and understanding that the Lord wants it all because that encompasses a trusted and safe relationship, which is the goal all along. And so I love just the practical part of that. And I'm always trying to, we carry a lot of burdens upon ourselves. And so I'm always trying to say, hey, let's take it back to the Lord and who he is and his truth and his word, because it always makes it lighter. It takes the pressure off of us. And so Rebecca, as we're kind of wrapping up our conversation today, I want to go back to the message of this entire conversation, the message of your book, the heart of what you're communicating to us today, which is you're not too late. You are not too late. How can we cultivate the posture of our hearts to persevere and be patient in that perseverance, understanding that whatever it is that we are longing for, we are not too late.
Yeah, yeah. We've said it a couple of times in this conversation, but in the subtitle of the book, I use the term, we trusting God's timing in a hurry up world. And just that thought of a hurry up world, I think is so important here because we're probably not going to change that this side of heaven, right? Like that is
Right.
that is our culture, that is what we live in.
Yeah.
So, in order to trust in God's timing, in order to faithfully move forward in the meanwhile, it will always feel like we're pressing back against culture, and that's okay. Right? That is okay. And so I think the recognition and the mindset shift that this is actually going to be a countercultural journey for me to honor God through this path, again, whatever type of longing it is, for me to talk about it in a way that honors God, for me to live it out in a way that brings him glory. um, Waking up every day going like, Lord, how do I do that well in a way that brings you glory? And so it's always going to feel like we're pressing back against a hurry up world. And that's
Yeah.
important to remember.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I just love all of the wisdom that you shared with us. There's so many other aspects that we could dive into, but listeners, I just want to encourage you to connect with Rebecca. I would encourage you. Radical Radiance is a fantastic podcast. I know you dive into the book a little bit more in detail in the
Yeah.
topics of the book, and so if this message and just the words that Rebecca has shared with you today have really resonated with you, and you want to dive further into this topic, first of all, I would highly encourage you to get the book. It's very interactive, which I think is fantastic. I love the way that you authored this and designed it to cause us to ponder and to participate a little bit more,
Yeah.
because brain science tells us that when we do that, it sticks. The message of it
Yeah.
sticks a little bit better. So I love that that's the way you formatted it. But I want to encourage y'all. We're going to have all those links, but take a moment to share with us where we can find you, where we can find a copy of the book.
Sure. Well, I'm the most active over on Instagram. My handle is Rebecca George Author. You can listen to the podcast wherever you like to download podcasts. The Radical Radiance podcast is the name of it. And then you can grab the book anywhere books are sold: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Christian Book. The full title again is You're Not Too Late: Trusting God's Timing in a Hurry Up World.
Love it. Okay. Families, we will have those links in today's show notes. And if there's been something that was shared in today's conversation that really resonated with you, that sparked further questions or a need for more conversation, please feel free to hit that email address that's in the show notes today. Send me a message, and I would love to follow up with you. I know, Rebecca, you would love to receive a message as
Yeah.
well. And so we really have been so blessed to create a community here at Called to Love. And I love hearing your questions, and I'm so honored every time you share your stories. And so please feel comfortable and safe to do that. And I would love to dive further into any of the topics that have resonated with you that you just want to know a little bit more about. And so also, do us a favor and like or follow this podcast, and also leave a comment and a rating for us so that more families can be reached. And for those of us who podcast, we really appreciate that. Rebecca can
Of
attest to
course.
that, as
Yes.
we're doing all the things. And so we are so grateful, my friend. I just love you dearly, and I'm just praying blessings over this message for you and just your continued ministry. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you, friend. I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much for listening to Called to Love today. I love to hear from listeners, and so I would love to connect with you to hear your stories and answer your questions right here on the show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, send me a direct message, or send me an email at the link in today's show notes. I pray you have been encouraged by today's episode to walk in faith and continue to embrace your own call to love. Until next time, blessings, sweet friends.